Now let me come to my own observations. They're very simple observations, and I think we can build on it as we go along. We all know that media is extremely crucial, and today, and more importantly, now during the lockdown period, several generations are plunging headlong into the use of media without actually being fully aware of what they are getting into and how it can affect them. Media, in all its avatars, is a two-edged sword, and it's very important that we understand what media literacy is, and we should know how media literacy can make us more aware of the media and how its use can not only benefit us, but it can also define us. I love the media. I teach it in a small way, and I am amazed every day by the many possibilities. But one of my greatest worries is the loss of privacy. And there is very little that I can do about it. If you are online, then you've lost your privacy, no matter how many firewalls you may have installed. So very briefly, I have three things to highlight. Number one, media literacy is crucial, and it's crucial across segments of people, young people, professionals, unemployed, teachers, learners. Media literacy is crucial. That's my first point. The second point is media is a two-edged sword. It has its benefits, it has its negative side as well. Most of us are aware of it, but we are not seriously aware of that. And my third observation is that whenever we go online, despite whatever we may say, there is no law, there is no privacy there. So with those three points, I'd like to close my initial remarks.
Just as an opening, just a few comments. One is, I think the goal of media literacy really fits well into some basic democratic goals about participation and what citizenship means, and how to be informed, how to participate with organizations, with parties, with community groups in self-governance. And I think that's, to me, one of the strongest parts of media literacy. There's economic dimensions and other social dimensions as well. But it also, as educators, this kind of civic goal and democratic goal kind of sets the basis, which also runs alongside what we might call civics education, history, democratic institutions, ability to do research and to think critically and assess different sources. One point I'd like to make is that I think with media literacy, we focus on the individual as a starting point, is that how do we interpret and understand and criticize and use media? And so there we think primarily about media content, and that has a strong tradition in media studies. We also have a strong tradition in audience uses and behavior and how people make meaning and interpret media. And I think that's a really important part of thinking about media literacy. And it's been voiced already how important creativity is. That is, the ability to participate in society. It means also being able to make media and voice media. I'd also like to think a bit about some other levels of analysis, including understanding the platforms, the technologies, and their capabilities and how they're being used, understanding the industry, the purposes, the corporate forms the groups that are making messages, and the broader structure of policy and political economy. And those structural relationships are often part of our role as educators in media studies as well, and take a lot longer, I think, in terms of kind of helping people understand the world in which they're living in. But my third point to open, I think as media educators, we might want to think both about formal education, but also how we make a transition so that our graduates and the community members with whom we work can also be equipped to engage in critical development of media law. That's been used by many people organizing groups, discussions of what people observe and think about media processes, content is part. People examining their own media uses. What do they do with their day? How do they spend their time? What are they paying attention to? I think that's an important part of media literacy that doesn't take a whole lot of infrastructure, but can be more of a guided reflection on personal life. And thinking about not just media messages, but participation and engagement in a variety of mediated experiences. So I'll stop there. And again, thank you for having me as part of the conference. And I look forward to the panel.
I speak to you from Johannesburg, from one of the biggest schools in South Africa, journalism schools in the country. I run an experiential teaching hospital type professional program. We take in very few students a year and train them at fourth year level, so honors level, to become journalists. So I speak to you from the perspective of a journalism educator, but I'm also the editor of their community newspaper, and I have a teaching background in media studies. And I think all of that comes together quite nicely when we have a discussion about media literacy and visual literacy and so on and so forth. What I'm particularly concerned with is how do I shape my journalists to become educators for media literacy? So how do I teach them to teach media literacy through the work of journalism? Because I think that is something that has fallen to the media industry itself to take on as a responsibility. So it's almost not enough for us as educators to say that we're going to teach media literacy, but how are we empowering our journalists of the future to teach that? Because that's something, quite frankly, I know in my own curriculum and in the curriculum across the country has fallen away from a journalism perspective. It continues to be taught at media studies level. When it comes to practical journalism, it doesn't exist, right? We assume almost that we are self-reflexive in how we are practicing our journalism. So some of the things I can point to, for example, are, we've started to encourage our students to become a lot more reflexive and expressing their reflexivity in the stories that they're telling. So when we publish a story, we have a disclosure box that says, this is how I came upon the story, this is how I understood the story, these are the people I spoke to, this is the verification process that I went through. So taking it a step beyond just publishing and incorporating a level of transparency. And in that way, I believe that some of the consumers of that content is thinking about where the story came from. How did it come about? How did we put it together? We're almost, to look on the bright side of this pandemic, I've turned to what has been coined the infodermic and tried to find some synergies with what we've been taught in South Africa to do from a public health perspective. And try to figure out, are there analogies that I can use in media literacy, right? So in South Africa, I don't know what's happening in many of the other countries, but the standard message that we've received from the WHO is wear a mask. And I would say to my students, in terms of the infodermic, wear a lens. Look through those different lenses that you have. Is it a feminist lens? Is it a racially sensitive lens? Whatever it is, to look at information. In terms of a physical distance, have a critical distance to that information. Even the stuff that you're producing yourself, start to think about it critically. And critical thinking, I don't know about the rest of my colleagues, is something that we really, really struggle with a newer generation that's used to not reading enough. And I know it sounds old to say that, but it's almost like there's no depth to reading sometimes. And it's a kind of fast reading that young people are used to doing, not the slow, immersive reading that many of us are used to. And then the third perspective, wash your hands often, reflect often. And hopefully, you know, those three things of keeping that critical distance and engaging with information critically, using lenses and looking at information through different lenses, and obviously, you know, just marinating on that information on a regular basis are things that we can teach our students in order to approach this infodermic, as it were. And then another, just, you know, something that we're thinking about is how do we elevate fact checking away from simple verification. I think often when we think of fact checking in the practice of journalism, we think about it as it is verification, it's what we do. But I'm saying to us, let us think about it on another level and think about it as breaking down information and thinking about that information, its sources, who's producing it, where is it going, what was the intention, and so on and so forth. And in that way, empowering our students to almost approach their work differently. I think I'll leave it there for the moment. I think we will have some questions that come up later and we can take it from there.
So I'd like to start by just explaining a little bit about what the People's Archive of Rural India is. We are an online journal, we're an archive. We have stories and films across India on rural issues, rural livelihoods, communities, culture, craft, and agriculture, and so on. Why do I mention this? I mention this because today's topic of media literacy, we just need to unpack. I thought I can unpack that a little bit and say that what is this media literacy? If there are 800 million people, according to the 2011 census, who live in rural areas but who don't feature in the mainstream news, then I feel that this media literacy is a very selective media literacy that we are discussing. So which is why the People's Archive of Rural India is about, you know, opening out that media literacy to include the lives and livelihoods, the news and events which affect 800 million people, right? Now we do get to hear about rural India. We either hear about the barbaric, like, you know, Khap Panchayats who order honor killings, or we hear about people who are branded as witches, or on the other end of the spectrum, we hear about, you know, crafts which are dying and there are only 5 people who do that craft and it's kind of exoticized. But between these two extremes, there is a wide swathe of lives and livelihoods in rural India which we know nothing about. And at the People's Archive of India, every time one of us journalists goes out and writes a story, we learn a lot. And it's because of that learning that comes from reporting on these issues that we felt that let's take this a little further. So coming now to classroom practice, at PARI, we know that people are using our stories in, you know, educational universities across India, across the world, you know, to explain, to describe, to show different kinds of topics and so on, right? But we wanted to up the stakes a bit, and we want to do perhaps a little course correction there. So just bear with me. And we know that PARI stories are interdisciplinary. For example, a story on farming is not just a story on farm and the laborer. It's a story about ownership of capital. It's about how farmers can become landless laborers. It's about seeds and biodiversity. It's about the economics of irrigation versus yield. It's about biodiversity. It's about policies and subsidies. We all talk about, you know, banks being robbed blind by big businessmen, and then we complain about subsidies given to farmers. And there are so many things, so many topics in textbooks which can be discussed with the PARI story. But above all else, we believe that it is the human lives that we write about behind those textbook concepts which really bring it to life, right? And bring it to you in a way that is, we are essentially storytellers. And by telling you the story of somebody's life across these various boxes, we try and show you an interdisciplinary story, teaching, and so on, right? So we thought, why not switch this around? Why not get students to engage with the farmer or the craftsperson or the migrant or the community or the laborer or whoever, get them to engage, get them to find out, and get them to write for us. And that's where PARI education comes in. So we started a few years ago, rather gingerly actually, saying that, you know, going into schools and colleges and universities and saying, let's talk about rural India. And then we decided that we didn't want to do this show and tell, you know, we wanted students and teachers to begin engaging. So we began designing projects with the help of professors and universities and teachers and schools. And today, if you go to PARI education website, you'll see evidence of this. We have a fabulous story put up last week about Jaunsari herders in Uttarakhand, a community of very small herders, rearers, and weavers. And it's a story which unpacks everything for you. The economics, the sociology, the development goals, the aspirations, even climate change is mentioned in that story. And students, we have at the end of each Pari story, we have what's called an editor's note in which the student tells us that by doing this story, what is it that they actually learned? So by doing this, we get students to actually engage with the big processes of our times, the big issues of our times: poverty, inequality, caste-based occupations, poverty, gender. So it's not just a story, it's an engagement, and it's engagement not just with a subject, multiple subjects, and not just with multiple subjects, but multiple issues of our times, right? And our whole purpose behind this is that we want students to have a more human experience of what they are learning, right? So, for example, we have students who tell us, oh, I know everything about this craft. I went and studied it. I went to the weaver. I learned everything. But in India or in any craft, for example, you cannot separate the craft and the craftsperson, right? So we say, okay, can you also tell us about the life of the craftsperson? And there is so much of learning that unpacks over there. So, right, so this is how we have taken media literacy into the classroom, and it's a very exciting process. We just, as you mentioned, we just launched last month. We are getting lots of, excitement among students, teachers, professors. So please join us, and I'll be happy to hear what the rest of the panelists have to say. Thank you.
So I would like to look at it more of how the whole media scene has evolved because of my own the way I've seen. Because 40 years ago, if you look at the post-emergency situation in the country, the newspapers reached only 1 or 1.5% of the population, and they had to be both educated and had to economically afford to buy a newspaper every day. Because in the 70s and 80s, television and radio were completely controlled by the state. So then, along with the economic and other revolutions, we had the huge explosion of literacy and urbanization. So today, according to the Audit Bureau of Circulation, newspapers are reaching a population of 25 to 30%, whereas mass media is itself reaching 70 to 80% of the population in different forms, from television, radio, social media, community outreach efforts, and all that. So that is a kind of revolution which is still in the process. So also what happened was, when newspapers were very elitist because they catered to an educated, economically strong readership, now the consumer themselves have changed. I remember when I was covering the Indian Space Research Organization, Dr. Satish Dhawan, one of the foremost space scientists, his ambition was that ISRO should help every Indian to have a transistor radio so that he can listen to news, information, and this thing. Today, it is not the radio, but the smartphone and all other devices make information accessible to almost everyone in the country. This is a kind of revolution which we have had. Also is coupled with urbanization. But the question is, what kind of news is reaching people? What kind of things are happening? Because as we reach larger and larger audiences, we have also changed our style of working, changed our reporting, and what we were not focusing 40 years ago, we are focusing more. We have dropped some of the things, and also there's a strong criticism that the media, especially print and television media, we have dumbed down a lot. That is obvious because we are reaching the largest common denominator of readership or viewership. But yet, the situation is not very dismal, though we have dumbed down a bit, because the kind of information which we are giving today, whether it's in English or Hindi or the regional languages, is much more than what I remember, because we used to cover speech after speeches. in the earlier days. Now speeches are less. Photographs of formal inaugurations, wreath laying or garlanding of statues, these were being covered. Now it's changed because the demand is more. We are covering more of health, more of education, more of rural development and others. Because one of the things is there's a lot of criticism that we are, now this is a popular phrase that a Lutyens' Delhi journalism. Our own political leadership is attacking the media, saying that you guys are, but then no, it is not like that. Even if you take the largest circulated Hindi newspaper in the country, it has more than 1,200 editions across 9 states, which means every 50 kilometers, the Dainik Bhaskar or Dainik Jagan, they change because they have to cater to the local readership. We have become more and more local, that is both from local to the global we are covering. So this is the kind of things media has changed. So it's not that somebody sitting in the headquarters in Bhopal or Lucknow, Kanpur will decide how these 2 papers will be, and it's the same with all other newspapers. So how do we, and then also the other phenomenon we all look forward to was that of the citizen journalist. That is, everybody is a reporter, everybody is a videographer. So, and that too, the spread of smartphones and social media has done that. But now, after the last quarter century of internet and then other internet-related revolutions, I still now think that people want somebody to select their news for them, information for them. Because as other panelists mentioned, there's a huge infodemic that started from the turn of the century. So, but then gossip, misinformation, fake news has always been there. Because nowadays this phrase which is not used is when I came to journalism was hello journalism. Oh my, this publication is a hello journalism. Hello journalism meant, because hello journalism, for those who don't know, is because the color of the newsprint on which newspapers printed were yellow, very bad quality paper. So that's how the phrase hello journalism came, which is either sensationalist or exaggerated or this thing. So this kind of fake news has always existed. Of course, now it has become much bigger, much more immediate and much widespread. That's why we come to know about. But still people are now, I think as the evolution of communication and absorption of information increases, people will look forward to somebody to edit it, because newspapers have 7 layers of editing. Television channels unfortunately have 1 layer of editing. When they go live, even that is not there. And social media has no editing. Nobody is fact checking. Anybody anywhere can put anything. So it can cause a lot of good as well as a lot of harm. A lot more harm has been done. Rumors and other things spread faster through. And that's why every time there's some tension, we hear the authorities say they want to shut down the internet. They think by that, but then rumor and fake news spread otherwise also. So this is the current status on but then our people today are much more smarter, much more aware of information, because I remember in the 70s and all that, we go to the villages, they would have no this thing except the All India Radio, this thing will be there. There'll be no electricity, there's no other this thing. So they wouldn't know news which has happened even 10, 15 days before that wouldn't have reached the village. So this is the situation where there's a lot of change, some good and some not so. Thank you.
While I was listening to everybody, I was thinking back to the time when I joined as a faculty member here in US, which was in 2006, and how the whole aspect of teaching in the classroom has changed in all these years. And I was thinking to myself that every class that I teach, you mentioned some of the classes that I teach, now has a media literacy component to it, because it's no longer like you can't put media literacy in a box and say, here is where you go to learn it, because everything you learn right now has a media literacy aspect to it. So when I think of media literacy, I think of a couple of things to start with. One is, first of all, how do I see it in terms of defining media literacy? So to me, media literacy is the ability to access, analyze, evaluate, create, and act using a variety of forms of communication. So media literacy includes the ability to understand how and why media messages and images are constructed and for what purposes they're used. So, and it also helps citizens examine how individuals interpret messages differently. So that's another important aspect of it, that not everybody will see the same message in the same way, because they'll interpret it based on their skills, beliefs, backgrounds, experiences, and they also will consider how values and points of view are included and excluded in various messages, depending upon where they're coming from. So, so media literate citizens have to remain continually aware of the ways in which media can influence their beliefs and behavior. And this actively, so kind of going back to how this ties in with everything I teach, because I am a political communications scholar, a lot of my work and teaching connects with the idea of citizenship. So, and so one big area that is intertwined with media literacy is digital citizenship, because we cannot do anything without doing things digitally right now. So, and digital citizenship is very strongly interconnected with media literacy. It includes the norms of appropriate, responsible, and healthy behavior related to current technology use, including digital and other types of media. It includes ethics, etiquette, and security. Somebody mentioned here privacy issues in the current environment. So definitely, constantly being aware of that. So, so digital citizenship will include the ability to access, analyze, again, evaluate, develop, produce, and interpret media. So, and also it involves internet safety and cyberbullying prevention, which is another big issue right here in US about you need to be media literate to actually be one of those people that stands up to cyberbullying. So, so kind of going to, how this matters even in the current climate. We are in the midst of a pandemic. I live in a country which has the worst record of handling the pandemic in the world, even though this is one of the most developed countries in the world. And every day I see misinformation out there. There's so many different forms of information. Pradeep, you mentioned the infodemic and how we have been a part of this from way before. So, so that kind of, to think about it, media literacy therefore encompasses, first of all, critical thinking. So that's what I try to teach to my students as well, that to be media literate, first and foremost, you have to be a critical thinker. You have to look at things in a more broader lens and look at, okay, for example, what's the evidence behind whatever you're reading? Who is speaking? Who is the author and the purpose of the message? What values, lifestyles, or points of view are being represented in this message? What techniques are being used to attract your attention to the message? What is creating this aspect or perception of credibility to the message? How will different people read it? That's another big part of it. What was omitted from the message and who makes money from the message? So it's not just one thing. It's about being aware of the whole background behind whatever media you're being exposed to. So media literacy, especially when I talk about it with students, also involves not just identifying fake news, because there is a big climate of saying everything is fake news, at least in this country. There is very high levels of partisanship, and there is media credibility has been hurt pretty badly by the rhetoric here. So knowing what is fake and what is not fake is important, but not just that. Media literacy is also about being a strong creator of media. It's also you. If you are a media, you're a creator. Every student is creating some sort of media messages online, whether it's through a tweet, a YouTube video, an Instagram post, a Facebook post. So media literacy today is expanded to include media creation. So no longer are the students primarily passive consumers of media. They're now active content creators by online sharing, posting, and commenting. So when they are posting something, when they're creating content, they need to also think critically about what is it that I'm presenting out there. Who is going to watch my message? Am I going to educate somebody through what I'm doing out here? So it's also about giving back. It's not just about being an active consumer, but it's also about giving back and being a critical thinker in assessing what you're posting out there. One quick other thing before I end, media literacy involves an intergenerational divide in some ways. So we as people who teach also need to be constantly in the loop about what's happening with new technologies. And also, we should not be afraid to learn from our young students who bring their own perspective and understanding of the media world. So I think we can only become a more media literate society by participation and collaboration between the different units of meaning and different individuals in society. So those are some of my thoughts. So thank you for giving me the opportunity of sharing some of that.